Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 182 and it's simply titled Yoink. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen cards. Now, I do want to very quickly apologize for my voice. I am a little under the weather, so I do apologize if that comes through in the video anyway. But we're going to continue as if nothing is going on. So, with that being said, let's talk a little bit about our random card of the week, which was suggested to us by McKG3 over on my Discord. And that card is Act of Treason. So Act of Treason is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Gain control of target creature until the end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until the end of turn. So there are a lot of different versions of this card. This is probably the most well-known one. It is not the original, but it's probably the most well-known, at least in my own opinion. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. But I wanted to do something a little bit unique with this deck, and so I decided we'd add a couple more colors to it, and we're going to be stealing our opponent's things, but we do really intend to give them back, and that's because our commander is Don Andres the Renegade. So Don Andres is 1 blue, black, red for a 4/3 vampire pirate. Each creature you control but don't own gets +2/+2, menace, and death touch, and is a pirate in addition to its other types. Plus, whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, create 2 tapped treasure tokens. I'll be perfectly honest, that second ability is probably not going to be relevant. We don't have a strong interest in casting our opponent's creatures because, well, that means that we don't get to have them. And then we also don't really have an interest in casting their non-creatures because we want them to be in play to take them. We're basically just trying to be pirates. We want to steal things, but we also want to be nice pirates and give those things back. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of our themes for this deck and really talk about what makes this work. So the very first theme, like we've already talked about, is going to be theft effects. Specifically, these are the effects that give us control of a creature until the end of turn, because that means with Don Andres, they're getting +2/+2 menace and haste, so we can just kind of swing in with our opponent's things, do some damage, and then give them back in the hopes that they will continue to be useful either to us or against some of our opponents. And so a great example of that is Harness by Force, which is 1 red for a sorcery, and it has Strive. So Harness by Force costs 2 and a red more to cast for each target beyond the first, but we gain control of any number of target creatures until the end of turn, untap them, and they gain haste. So this is not the most efficient. 6 mana to take 2 creatures is pretty expensive, but it kind of is the going rate for Act of Treason effects. 3 mana to steal a creature and give it back is pretty much where we want to be. So being able to use Harness by Force as multiple Act of Treason effects is pretty effective. Moving in to our next theme for this deck, we're going to talk a little bit about pirates. So because Don Andres turns the things we steal into pirates, we can actually play some pirate synergies without leaning too heavily into piracy ourselves. And that gives us the ability to really play around with some lord effects and some theft effects, and again, some pirate synergies that you may not normally get to play in a theft deck. So Admiral Beckett Brass here is 1 blue, black, red for a 3/3 human pirate. Other pirates you control get +1/+1, and at the beginning of your end step, gain control of target non-land permanent controlled by a player who has dealt combat damage by 3 or more pirates this turn. So this is one of our few permanent theft effects, because we do kind of just want to steal things with pirates, and if we're stealing things, they become pirates with Don Andres, and then we steal more things, which also become pirates. So it really is just kind of like a snowball effect with Admiral Beckett Brass. So I did contemplate putting her in the key cards section of this deck tech because she really is very impressive, but I thought that she highlighted our piracy theme a little bit better. With that being said, let's move into our final theme of the deck, which is going to be crimes. Obviously, we're not focused on the crimes. We don't have a ton of crime payoffs, But because all of our Act of Treason effects essentially commit crimes, we can lean into cards like Intimidation Campaign, which is 1 blue-black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses a life, you gain a life, and you draw a card. But whenever we commit a crime, we may return it to its owner's hand. So we can steal someone's creature, bounce this back to our hand, and then recast it. A lot of our crime effects are going to be a little bit more theft-based than Intimidation Campaign, but it's a great example of what we're really trying to do. So those are all of our themes for our deck this week. And the next thing that we've got to do is take a quick look at some key cards. These are the cards that are kind of like the MVPs of the deck. These are the cards we really want. Sometimes they're value pieces or value engines. Sometimes they're even win conditions. But either way, they're really going to help us further our game plan. So the first of our key cards that I want to talk about is going to be the Beast Deathless Prince, which is 2 black-red for a 6/6 demon. When you cast this spell, gain control of target creature until the end of turn. Untap it, it gains menace and haste until the end of turn. So it's automatically an Act of Treason effect. But the beast also enters the battlefield tapped with 6 stun counters on it, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to its owner, untap the beast and draw a card. So notably, because it has 6 stun counters on it, we would have to untap it 6 times before it actually untaps. But the more important part of this is that we get to draw cards whenever we do damage to an opponent with their own creature, which is basically what we want to be doing anyway. So having a theft effect on a creature that then rewards us by drawing cards is incredibly effective, and it is a 4-mana 6/6, which will untap a lot sooner than you expect, and while it has no evasion, it's still going to be enough to really shift the tide in our favor. Moving on, though, to our second key card. This one is going to be Gaedrone Dihada. So Gaedrone is 1 blue, black, red for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Dihada. She has protection from permanents with corruption counters on them. And we can +1. Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Put a corruption counter on up to 1 other target creature or planeswalker. -3. Gain control of target creature or planeswalker until the end of turn. Untap it, put a corruption counter on it, it gains haste. And -7, gain control of each permanent with a corruption counter on it. So this is a card that really puts in a lot more work than it looks like. Because she's putting a corruption counter on something every single time we activate an ability, whether it's a +1 or a -1, we can essentially +1 and start ticking her up, put corruption counters on the things that are most likely able to hit her, and then slowly work our way to the ultimate, where for -7 and no mana, we can just take everything with a corruption counter. So worst case scenario, we've done that 3 times, getting her from 4 to 7, and can take 3 things. But ideally, we'll be able to keep her out a little bit longer and steal even more things with an ultimate. Normally, I would not advocate pushing for a Planeswalker's ultimate because it is very difficult, but when she can essentially give herself protection from the biggest threats on the field, or maybe the things with evasion, it really is worth talking about because there is a chance we get to that point. Finally, we're going to talk about our last key card on the list, and this one is going to be Thieving Amalgam. So Thieving Amalgam is 5 black for a 6/7 ape snake. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest the top card of that player's library, and whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its owner loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this does work for a couple of different reasons. One, it is just, in a sense, it's card advantage. It gives us a free 2/2 every single upkeep. But more importantly, that is a 2/2 that is owned by an opponent, but is controlled by us. So even if it's a land and we can't flip it face up, we can still have it count as a creature as long as it's face down, and can drain out our opponents by killing their own things, which essentially forces them to either block our stuff and kill our stuff and drain them, or let the creature through and take the damage, which if we have something like the Beast in play, draws us cards. We have some other synergies as well, things like the Pirates, for example, because they would be creatures we control but don't own, so they're getting +2/+2 from Don Andres. So this is just a huge swing in our favor. And if Thieving Amalgam stays in play for even just a couple of turns, it's very unlikely that we wind up losing that game. But anyway, that is the end of our key cards section. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize very well together and in some case can be win conditions on their own or can even be just value engines. And honestly, more likely than not, are just fun cards that I want to highlight. So the first cool interaction that I want to talk about is between Willbreaker and Dominus of Fealty. Willbreaker is technically another crime payoff, even though she doesn't specifically care about crimes. She is 3 blue for a 2/3 human wizard. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability that you control, gain control of that creature for as long as you control Willbreaker. We're going to partner that up with Dominus of Fealty, which is a massive 5 Izzet hybrid mana, so a blue-red, 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 for a 4/4 Spirit Avatar that's got flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may gain control of target permanent until the end of turn. If you do, untap it and it gains haste until the end of turn. So this has some very unique synergies, but most of the time what we're going to use it for is permanently stealing an opponent's creature, well, permanently provided we get to keep Willbreaker on the battlefield, because Dominus will target something at the beginning of our upkeep. Willbreaker will see that we've targeted a creature, and then it becomes ours for as long as we control Willbreaker. Now, that is the main use of this, but Dominus can also be used to take any permanent, so it can take planeswalkers, and we can ultimate people's planeswalkers. We can take enchantments, we can take artifacts, we can even take lands if we notice that we're 1 or 2 lands short of what we need to do. So this is a very powerful effect, but the only time we will permanently take something with Willbreaker and Dominus is if we target a creature with Dominus, so that is very important to note. Moving on, though, to our next cool interaction. For this one, we're going to highlight Gisa Glorious Resurrector and Conjurer's Closet. So Gisa is 2 black for a 4/4 human wizard. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Gisa onto the battlefield under your control. They gain Decayed. So essentially what that means is if we attack with that creature, we have to sacrifice it at the end of combat. That is less than ideal, but you'll notice that it doesn't specify that they have to attack. They just get decayed. So we get them to come in, we get their enter the battlefield effect, and then we can move to our end step without attacking and trigger Conjurer's Closet, which is 5 mana for an artifact that says at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. This lets us exile a creature with a decayed counter on it, or I guess they're technically not counters, it's just decayed. But anyway, we get to exile it, it loses decayed as it comes back in, and now it is permanently ours as well. We didn't take it with a theft effect, we actually just get to keep it. So Conjurer's Closet is one of the few ways in the deck that we can permanently keep things, but it is incredibly powerful when we do so, and it works especially well with Gisa because we just kind of get the creatures anyway when they die. So this is a super useful combination of cards, and it's a very efficient way to do what we want to be doing. But that is the end of our cool interactions, and so the next piece of this deck tech is to take a look at the price of the deck. And so this week our deck price came in at $62.66, which is almost half of our budget, so we still have quite a bit of wiggle room if we need it. But the most expensive card in the entire deck is actually Thassa Deep Dwelling at a massive $14.76. So if you are looking to trim the deck below $50, you could actually just cut Thassa and it would be below $60. We have plenty of Act of Treason effects that are not in the deck because either they just didn't quite make the cut or they weren't quite as good as some other ones, so you could very easily replace Thassa if you needed to. However, once we read Thassa, you'll realize that she might be worth including. She's 3 and a blue for a 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god. She has indestructible. As long as our devotion to blue is less than 5, Thassa isn't a creature. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 other target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under your control, and you can pay 4 and tap another target creature. So this is effective in several different ways. Most likely, like the Conjurer's Closet we just talked about, being able to exile a creature and bring it back under our control means that we can permanently steal things if that's what we want to do. But it's also important to remember that Don Andres gives our things menace. Being able to tap other creatures so that way our menace creatures can get in is actually surprisingly effective and gives us the chance to do a little bit more damage and some more shenanigans with our stuff that we may not be able to otherwise. So I do highly recommend keeping Thassa in the deck if that's something you're able to do, but I do understand if you need to trim her for budget purposes, she is very expensive as a card. On the other hand, though, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that's a little bit outside of our budget range, I have a suggestion for you there as well. So in this case, I would recommend putting in Edward Kenway, and if we're putting a card in, then you'd have to take a card out, so I would recommend taking out Bloody Betrayal. So starting off with the card we're putting in, Edward Kenway is 2 blue, black, red for a human assassin pirate. He's a 5/5, so he fits our theme. He's a pirate. And at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each tapped assassin, pirate, and or vehicle you control. That is by far the most important line of text on Edward, because you'll notice that he also says whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, exile it face down, and you may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. We don't actually have any vehicles, but I do genuinely believe Edward is good enough just with that first ability, because it's creating a treasure token for each tapped pirate we control. And again, keeping in mind, Don Andres turns our opponent's things into pirates when we steal them. So we're able to steal a couple of things, we attack, then they're tapped in our end step, so we get some treasures, meaning we can now cast more Act of Treason effects next turn and make more treasures and just kind of get out of control with Edward. But like I said, if you do need to put a card in, we have to take a card out. And the obvious answer here is an Act of Treason clone in Bloody Betrayal, which is 2 and a red for a sorcery, gain control of target creature until the end of turn, untap it, it gains haste, and create a blood token. Now, notably, it is strictly better than Act of Treason, but obviously we can't cut Act of Treason because it is the card of the deck. So Bloody Betrayal is the second best, since it just creates a blood token, and we don't really have any artifact synergies or discard synergies, so it doesn't do too much for us. And I think that Edward is going to be a much better fit for the deck overall. But that is our deck tech, and before we get into a game with this deck, because of course we got to see how it plays, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. So as always, you can just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. We're making the push to try to get to 1,500 subscribers by the end of the year, so please do join us in that. Send this to your friends, let people know. And of course, if you're looking to go above and beyond and support us a little bit more, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, and right here on YouTube as a channel member, which I will make sure to link in the video description, where you can join the amazing people listed below, such as William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Hui, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Tyler Esme, Sven van Nimwegen, Paddywhack, Keegan Tawney, Elias Meza, and Jakar. So to all of you, thank you all so much for all of your support, and if you want some of the amazing benefits that come from the Patreon or being a channel member, check us out there as well. But without any further ado, let's see who we're playing against this week in our game, because like I said, we gotta see how this deck performs if we're just gonna talk about it. So our opponents this week are going to be Jason playing Teysa Opulent Oligarch, AngryCow playing Atla Palani Nest Tender, and Bilal playing Helga Skittish Seer. So starting off with Jason and his Teysa deck, this is an Aristocrats deck, but he specifically also focuses on clues because Teysa's going to create clues, and then he wants to create a bunch of spirits, and he cares about tokens and a bunch of stuff. But I think what it really boils down to is that this is Jason playing an Aristocrats deck, which means he is automatically priority number 1 because that is his specialty when it comes to Commander. That is by far the thing that he is the best at, and every single time I see him sit down with an Aristocrats deck, it could be the worst built deck in the world, which let's be honest, it's not because Jason's an amazing deck builder. But even if it was, he could find a way to pilot it to victory. So that is definitely the deck that I am the most concerned about sitting down at this table. Moving on to Cow's deck, the Atlapalani deck. This is another deck that I am concerned about, but as bad as it sounds, I think that the Atlapalani deck actually winds up helping us in this game because I'm sure he's playing a bunch of giant creatures, which we can then steal, make bigger with Don Andres, and smack him instead. So there is a chance that if we just kind of let Cow do his thing, we may be able to steal a victory out from underneath him. And then, of course, that same thought actually applies to Bilal's Helga deck as well, because he's also just playing giant creatures and trying to make a ton of mana. So there is, once again, a chance that if we let Bilal do his thing, we can just take his creatures and win the game because of it. So I'm not super concerned about the Atlapalani or the Helga decks. Granted, if they move a little bit faster than we do, then it becomes a problem. But I do genuinely believe that they are our pathway to victory in this game, and the real threat is going to be Jason and his sacrifice outlets, because we can take a 1/1, we can take a sacrifice outlet, we can take a drain effect like a Blood Artist, but that's really not going to do us a lot of good. We need to make sure that Bilal and Jason are doing their things, or I'm sorry, Bilal and Cow are doing their things, and we can stop Jason along the way. So with all of that being said, please do let me know down in the comments which of these decks you think is going to be our winner. Get your predictions in now before you watch the game. And other than that, I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. I hope you will enjoy the video for the game. I'm sure I certainly will. And I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I go first, followed by Jason, Cow, and then Bilal. On my first turn, I play a Temple of Deceit, scrying 1. Jason plays a Bojuka Bog, exiling my graveyard. Cow plays an Arctic Tree Line. Bilal plays a Myriad Landscape. I play a Mountain. Jason plays a Swamp and casts Marble Diamond. Cow plays a Fury Calm Snarl, revealing a plane so it comes into play untapped, then casts Invasion of Mercadia, choosing Bilal to defend it, discarding a card and drawing 2. Bilal plays a Temple of Mystery, scrying 1. I play an island. Jason casts his commander Teysa, Opulent Oligarch, letting him investigate in his end step for each opponent who lost life that turn, and also creating a 1/1 spirit token whenever a clue he controls is put into the graveyard, but only once each turn. He then plays a Goldmire Bridge and passes. Cow plays an Exotic Orchard and casts Cultivate, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into his hand. Bilal plays an Irrigated Farmland and casts Farseek, searching his library for a Lush Portico, putting it into play tapped and surveilling 1. I play a Mountain and cast my commander Don Andres the Renegade, giving creatures I control but don't own, +2/+2, Menace and Death Touch, and also making them pirates in addition to their other types. Jason plays a Swamp and attacks Cow for 2 with Teysa. Then, in his second main phase, Jason also cast Braid's Arisen Nightmare, letting him sacrifice a permanent in his end step, then letting each opponent sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. If they don't, they lose 2 life and Jason draws a card. Then in Jason's end step, he creates a clue token with Teysa and sacrifices it to Braids, making a spirit token while each of his opponents lose 2 life and Jason draws 3. Cow plays a Sungrass Prairie and casts Explore, drawing a card and playing an additional land this turn, letting him play a forest. He also casts his commander, Atlapalani Nest Tender, which can tap to create a 0/1 egg token and revealing cards from his library until he reveals a creature, putting it into play whenever an egg dies. Bilal plays a forest and casts his commander Helga Skittish Seer, drawing a card, gaining a life, and putting a +1/+1 counter on her whenever he casts a creature with mana value 4 or greater. I play a swamp and cast Coercive Recruiter, letting me gain control of target creature, untap it, and give it haste whenever a pirate enters under my control. With this trigger, I take control of Braids and attack Jason with it for 5. Then in my end step, Braids triggers, letting me sacrifice her to draw 2 cards and make each opponent except Jason lose 2 life since he sacrifices a spirit. Jason plays a Swamp and attacks Bilal for 2 with Teysa. Then, in his second main phase, he casts Oher Tak, Deepest Foundation, tripling the tokens he would create. Then when he moves to his end step, he creates 3 clues with Teysa. Cow plays a Mountain and casts Seedborn Muse, letting him untap all of his permanents on each other player's untap step. This lets him activate Atla Palani to make an egg token, and then untap on Bilal's turn. On Bilal's turn, he also plays a Port Town, then casts Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, letting him draw a card whenever a creature enters under his control. He activates Kiora's -1 ability, untapping a forest, and sacrificing his Myriad Landscape to search his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. At the end of turn, Cow activates Atla Palani again, making another egg, and also casts Sazakap's Brew, discarding a card and drawing 2. On my turn, I play a Mountain and cast Admiral Beckett Brass, giving my pirates +1/+1 and letting me gain control of a permanent controlled by opponent when they're dealt damage by 3 of my pirates in a turn. When she enters, this lets me gain control of Cow's Atla Palani, which he activates to make another egg before I take it. Then I attack Cow with Don Andres, Atla Palani, and Coercive Recruiter for 15 total damage. He blocks everything but his own commander with 2 eggs, killing the tokens and taking 5. On Jason's turn, he casts Nadir's Nightblade, making each opponent lose a life while he gains a life whenever a token he controls leaves the battlefield. Then he sacrifices a clue, drawing a card, making 3 spirit tokens, gaining a life, and making each opponent lose a life. After that, he moves to combat and attacks me for 6 with Oher Tak. That lets him, in his end step, make 9 more clues with Teysa. Cow plays a Plains and casts Patriarch's Seal, which can tap to untap a legendary creature. He also casts Garrick's Pack Leader, letting him draw a card whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters under his control. At the end of turn, Jason casts Despark, exiling Cow's Seedborn Muse. On Bilal's turn, he casts Soul Ring, followed up by casting Sarah's Emissary, naming creature when it enters so he and his creatures have protection from creatures. He also draws 2 cards, gains a life, and puts a counter on Helga. He then taps Helga for 2 mana and activates Kiora's -1 ability to untap Helga, then taps Helga for 2 mana again to cast Shalai Voice of Plenty, giving Bilal and all his other creatures hexproof while he draws 2 more cards, gains another life, and puts another counter on Helga. On my turn, I cast Dragon Lord Salumgar, gaining control of Oher Tak until the Dragon Lord leaves the battlefield. I then attack Cow for 4 with Don Andres, letting him block with an egg, triggering Atla Palani, and putting a regular cohort into play from the top of his library, creating a 2/2 Changeling token. Jason casts Anointed Procession, doubling the number of tokens he would create, then sacrifices a clue, drawing a card, making 2 spirit tokens, gaining a life, and making each opponent lose a life. Then at the end of turn, Jason creates 6 clue tokens with Teysa. Cow plays a Naya Panorama, then attacks me for 2 with his Changeling token, and I block with Oher Tak, killing the Changeling, and since it counts as an egg, Cow is able to put Sun Titan into play from the top of his library, drawing a card and returning a forest from his graveyard to the battlefield. After that, he casts a Tarka World Render, drawing another card. Bilal plays an island and taps Helga for 2, then activates Kiora's -1 ability to untap Helga and tap her for 2 more. That lets him cast Beast Whisperer, letting him draw a card whenever he casts a creature. This also lets him draw 2 cards, gain a life, and put a +1/+1 counter on Helga. Notably, both Kiora and Helga only trigger on creatures with power 4 or greater, and since Beast Whisperer only has 2 power, Bilal shouldn't have drawn cards here, but we don't catch that at the time. After that, he also cast Tender Wild Guide, creating a token copy of it with Offspring, drawing another card, then attacks Jason for 10 with both his angels. In his second main phase, Bilal cast Concordant Crossroads, giving all creatures haste. On my turn, I cast Mob Rule, gaining control of all creatures with power 4 or greater. Once that's resolved, Bilal casts Teferi's Protection, phasing out all his permanents and preventing his life total from changing. This means I'm only able to attack Cow for 27 and Jason for 32, knocking them both out of the game, but having to return Bilal's creatures to him at the end of turn. Unfortunately, on Bilal's turn, he's able to cast Chancellor of the Spires, recasting my Mob Rule from the graveyard, taking my creatures with power 4 or greater, and casts Galta Primal Hunger, giving him just enough damage with Concordant Crossroads to attack me for 35, knocking me out, and winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a very quick game. I believe we only went to about turn 9, so there were definitely some very quick moves made in that game. I was correct in the very beginning that Jason's deck was a huge threat. Being able to triple and then eventually double his tokens meant that he could have made an absolutely absurd amount of spirits and clues if we weren't able to shut him down ahead of time. And so I think that if he'd been able to kind of get under and get over whatever we were doing, I don't 100% know how to describe it, but you know what I'm saying. If we could get around what we were doing, then I think he really could have just won that game straight up. Cow's deck did also very well. He and I made a couple of deals along the way that I would kill some of his eggs, as long as he wasn't attacking me with the thing that he got from the eggs for at least one turn. And my hope was that by giving him more things, then I could take his things and then win the game. But unfortunately, that wasn't quite the case. I was able to knock him out with some of it, but he hit a lot of smaller things. Hitting the irregular cohort to make more eggs, though, was a very sweet bit of tech, and I think that was super, super cool. And then, of course, talking about Bilal, our winner of the game, I wasn't expecting Bilal to be able to win the game. I knew he had the Concordant Crossroads, but I didn't expect him to be able to get quite enough damage to kill us. And honestly, even through all of his creatures, he only did 35 damage when we were at 30 life, and that's only because he took both Don Andres and another one of our cards, so he gave the stuff that he stole +2/+2, and without that, he wouldn't have been able to do it. So in a way, we kind of lost to our own mob rule, which was less than ideal. But I thought it was super cool nonetheless. And then our deck performed, I think, very well. We got off to a pretty slow start, didn't really do anything for the first few turns, but we really made an impact on the game with that mob rule. And I think that if Bilal had not killed us that turn, I did have an insurrection in hand, so I was fully prepared to just take all his stuff again, smack him and win the game, which is exactly why I wasn't super concerned with him using his Teferi's Protection. And in fact, I actually talked him into using the Teferi's Protection after I took his things, because that allowed me to knock out both Jason and Cow. And without that, I probably only would have taken out one. So a little bit of politicking went on behind the scenes in this game that you couldn't really see. So I wanted to make sure that we were all clear on that. But overall, I thought the game was a ton of fun. I thought the deck performed really well. It played very differently than a lot of theft decks I've played in the past. So let me know down in the comments what you think of the deck. Let me know if there's anything that should be included, or maybe anything that I should take out that maybe just isn't good enough. But overall, I was very happy with it, and of course the game as well. So thank you all so much for watching. Please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.